Um, Thank you for joining. We'll have our marketing coordinator admit folks as they roll in, so that we can continue to get moving through the process. So thanks for joining the webinar today. My name is Rich Hackenberg. I'm the Director of Sales with Applied Cloud Systems. I work specifically in our work very closely with the Microsoft team in support of their customers in education. That includes K through 12, higher education, and academic medical. And so I work exclusively in that marketplace in support of Microsoft. With me on the phone is Chris Bennett, who is a practice delivery manager. He will be presenting the Windows Virtual Desktop solution today and our approach to that. He is the lead for our team for our Windows Virtual Desktop deployments. In the last, I'd say, month or so, we've engaged with over 40 customers in education around supporting their initiatives based on the stay-at-home, learn-at-home, teach-from-home initiatives associated with this global pandemic that we're in the midst of. So we've got a lot of experience with customers in your space, and the premise of today's session is really to introduce you to Windows Virtual Desktop and how it can help you to support your initiatives around deploying solutions for your faculty, your staff, your professors, your students, whether that's on the desktop or for application groups like labs. So Chris will talk through that. So Chris, you want to flip the slide real quick? I'm going to take a minute or two just to but to introduce who we are, and then I'll turn it over to Chris. So we are a Microsoft-only cloud solution provider. We have specialized in the Microsoft Cloud technologies. We cover all three of Microsoft's clouds. That includes the modern workplace, so Office 365 and Teams, the infrastructure components with Azure, both on the infrastructure as well as the PaaS environment. Do a lot of work in governance and in helping customers move to the cloud and support their digital transformation, as well as have solutions and practices in custom application development and the Dynamics platform. So with that, Chris, you can flip slides. We've been around for just about 4 years and are what's considered to be a Microsoft managed partner, which essentially means that based on the certification levels that we have across the different platforms, and as well as the number of customers that we have that we're managing, we have a status of managed partner, which means that we have access to programs, direct access funding programs, and other programs from Microsoft that we're able to participate in as an extension of the Microsoft core team. So our offerings from a digital transformation perspective are listed here. So I mentioned a minute ago, Office 365, whether that's initial mailbox migration, SharePoint migration, or Teams implementation. We specialize in that area. Governance is probably one of our sort of key differentiators in the marketplace, and in particular with education, in that we have created with and for Microsoft a framework for deploying Azure in a templated fashion that is based on Microsoft's recommendations for best practices around governance. We have this thing called Cloud Adoption Framework, which we deploy for Microsoft, that allows customers to get up and running very quickly. We can do something in hours or a day that used to take weeks to do. So we've got a lot of capabilities around that, and that was again working in conjunction with Microsoft. So we help customers with migrations, data and AI. We do a lot of work with the Microsoft Data Platform, both from a governance perspective as well as advanced analytics and data warehousing. So we've got data architects that can build out reporting and analytics solutions and leverage the Microsoft platform for that. And that team also does a lot of work with app modernization. So as we look to move workloads from an on-premises data center to the cloud, we also look to take advantage of the capabilities afforded to us and to customers with the Microsoft Cloud Platform, and have done a lot of work around modernizing applications. So Chris, you can go to the next slide. Oh. So just very quickly, one of the things that we wanted to focus on during this is not only do we have expertise and a lot of I guess customers in the higher ed space. These are specific companies that we worked with or organizations that we work with in response to COVID-19. There are certainly more, but these are representative examples. We have deployed the HealthBot in a number of places. We have active engagements right now in Microsoft's HealthBot, Upstate Medical University. We helped them deploy the initial HealthBot in about 48 hours. On the Windows Virtual Desktop side, you can see a number of universities that we're currently working with, and this is certainly not an exhaustive list. This is a sample list. We're up to close to 40, I believe, right now in terms of customers that we've engaged with to support their remote learning. I actually had 2 kickoff calls this morning with 2 higher education organizations around their Windows Virtual Desktop deployments in response to COVID-19. Chris, next slide. So I'm going to turn it to Chris now. So that was just a quick rundown on who we are. He's going to talk specifically around Windows Virtual Desktop, how we prepare our customers for that. And
thanks, Rich. So as Rich mentioned, we kind of lead with a cloud adoption framework, which is allows any of our dark to cloud implementations to be able to get up and running quickly. We need to have a place to put Windows Virtual Desktop, need to know all of the underlying technical requirements for how we're going to get access, how we're going to secure it, how that's going to fit within the organizational constraints, how we're going to have the existing teams implement this. We are here as teachers, teaching our partner organizations on how to leverage the Azure platform efficiently and securely, and then move very quickly into adopting the virtual desktop platform. So as Rich mentioned, we have a sort of a templated and programmatized onboarding process to getting into Azure. If anybody's not already in there, it doesn't already have the core services. Other than that, we kind of step through with the WVD deployment through a pilot to production sort of design paradigm. But there are several delivery methods that we'll go through during the presentation here. So again, there's quite a bit that goes into the cloud adoption framework, depending on what the timing looks like. It's something that could be expedited, essentially leveraging our years of experience in the higher education and academic medical space to be able to provide the answers, as it were, as to how we deal with these things, deal with Azure at the scale of a university or even a K-12 system, how it's supported, how it's managed going forward, basically setting up for success, not just dumping in an implementation to meet a short-term need. Again, our goal here is to make Azure become an extension of the organization and help the skill set transformation of your internal support staff get comfortable with supporting not only Windows Virtual Desktop, but Azure in general. So diving into WVD, this is Microsoft's solution to not only the VDI space, but also application publishing. We're leveraging Windows 10 multi-session, which is a brand new operating system, which has been put out there to allow us to have multiple user sessions per individual virtual machine, which allows us to do a couple things. It allows us to drive cost efficiency because we're able to stack multiple users per machine, but it also allows us to be able to kind of be a little bit more dynamic in what we are able to offer, because we can have multiple users per machine and we've got full underlying control of what those machines are. We're actually able to kind of align a compute footprint with a specific application to be able to optimize performance in the user experience. Built into this, for anybody who's familiar with doing any sort of VDI implementation on premises, Office was always a pain point, getting that integrated and usable in a terminal server farm or an RDS farm or even Citrix. That's built into the OS with this new implementation. So all we need to worry about is translating our existing policies that may be governing these things over to the new environment. But once the underlying framework for Azure has been put in, this just becomes an extension of virtual machines running in Azure that are governed by how we deal with our networking, which allows us to deploy and scale relatively quickly once we have the underlying environment built out. So there's several sort of virtualization scenarios. Obviously, we're here dealing a bit reactionary to the COVID-19 crisis that's mandated work from home, learn from home, and deal with e-learning scenarios. But beyond the reactionary, what we're dealing with in the near term, long term, I mean, this is applicable in many different use cases throughout the organization. Obviously, labs, educational delivery becomes something that is a natural extension of this. But we even have the capability of leveraging virtual desktop to provide secure access for multiple types of employees to lots of different systems on multiple devices. I mean, it works on any HTML5 browser. We've got the ability to leverage native agents for Windows, Android, and iOS on Apple iOS devices. Which kind of opens the door for multiple delivery models again for even just published applications to your phone, for example, or actual desktop scenarios. But there's quite a bit that we can do with this because we have the full backing of the Azure technology stack. We can move into whatever type of machine workloads we need to, including providing graphical backed applications, data modeling. There's quite a bit that we've been able to do with this in the near term. There are a number of products that are probably in use internally at your organization. Citrix and VMware Horizon are two of the big ones. They do have native tooling for virtual desktop to be able to extend that environment out to Azure, which leverages the existing skill sets of your staff. Although there is the ability, obviously, to leverage all these things natively and not have to deal with the licensing overhead of a Citrix or a VMware. But it is very possible, again, dealing with speed to be able to get a familiar environment up and running that's administratable quickly, leveraging existing tool sets. But generally, we will just do the Azure native to not have the additional licensing overhead of something like a Citrix. Same thing with VMware. They do have an offering available for virtual desktop that allows the continuation of their product set on premises. So basically, there's multiple paths into WVD. Really, what it comes down to is additional licensing that's tied into these, and what the end user, or excuse me, the end administrator skill set looks like to be able to leverage the environment going forward. So eligibility wise, their virtual desktop is likely something that you as an educational institution already own. We have the ability to get this tied into our licensing that's out there for your existing Windows, Microsoft 365 licensing. Those are all eligible. They include the CAL, they include the full access for the published applications. So no additional licensing that is needed for this, which is a differentiator between, again, the two tool sets that I just walked through. But this is it is also extended to student use benefit. So we do have the ability for students to use this very easily, which makes WVD deployment in education kind of a natural extension of the product. Although if we do have existing server CALs that are out there, we can use them if for any reason we needed to. All we would need to do is add a licensing server to the farm, which is something that we can do, but the actual service takes care of licensing, load balancing, connection brokering, all of the complications that were previously there in the on-premises VDI world. And then obviously there is an underlying cost of the virtual machines and the storage they use that's running the environment. But we leverage automation and auto scaling to reduce down the cost footprint as much as possible while still providing, where needed, 24/7 access to the environment for students. So we have the entirety of Windows Virtual Desktop is built on top of the Microsoft ecosystem. So all of the connectivity goes through the security graph. So we get visibility into user sessions. We get some of the advantages of diving into the Microsoft-centric security ecosystem with the premium Active Directory licensing for anybody who's using EMS E3 or A5 licenses. All of the security that's around the identity around that connection through the Microsoft platform, we get visibility to it. We can centrally deal with it. But we also get the the traffic flow for virtual desktop actually goes through multiple visibility points directly through the Microsoft brokers. So we don't need to deal with any public access on the machines that are in Azure, which allows us to maintain a private and controlled footprint, but still providing our users access. And these are all AD joined machines. So we do have full capability for an Active Directory level reporting policies, anything that may be pre-existing, that you've got a defined security footprint for what your infrastructure looks like. We are able to extend that to this environment. So high-level architecture for virtual desktop, as I mentioned before, all of the pain points for previous VDI implementation, which would be dealing with web access, dealing with our gateway, our load balancing, and our brokerage to actually get users connected into the environment, as well as built-in diagnostics and management capabilities with the RDS broker itself. Those are all a platform service that we don't have to deal with dealing with the underlying administration of. We just use it. We get an SLA and things just work. This is a service that is distributed, geo-distributed, much like the Office 365 points of presence. So we do have multiple. We do have availability with it in multiple regions, but the ability, which gives us the ability to do multi-home, so we can deal with organizations that have campuses in multiple places in the country, for example, and providing the end users the optimal experience based off of the point of presence that their connection hits connecting to the environment. And then underneath the managed by Microsoft is the actual Azure subscription, the areas that we control. So this is what our underlying infrastructure is going to look like, what servers they're running on. We have control over building out our image that's used, what goes into that. And then there's a final decision point of, do we provide a desktop experience, or do we want to just publish the applications that our users need? Or do we want to do both in the same location? Because you do have some options here, segmenting by host pool, but either way, all under the higher level architecture that we have here. And then obviously in Azure, we've got our compute, storage, and networking. These are pre-staged and defined through the cloud adoption framework to meet the organization's needs. There's some variance here depending on the size of the organization, how many users, but for the most part, it follows the same paradigm, and it's just a matter of scaling the implementation that we've got templatized up or down based off of usage. Now, prereqs to deploy Windows Virtual Desktop. Obviously, an Azure subscription is in here, but once we have that Azure subscription, we need domain services. Now, this could be for a net new organization or somebody who does not have anything in Azure yet. This could be Azure Active Directory Domain Services, which is AD as a service, but generally, we are leveraging your existing forest, your existing Active Directory, and definitely want your existing UPNs that already have Office licensing associated with them to make the process a little bit more expedited. This could mean very simply building an IPsec tunnel to on-premises to get access to Active Directory to be able to join machines, running up to extending that identity infrastructure into Azure to provide business continuity, as well as some other advantages. But there isn't a lot of traffic between the machines and the backend domain controllers, so having them do calls back to on-premises is perfectly fine from a performance perspective. Then we need to figure out what we want to do with our profiles. So again, back in the on-premises days, we dealt with having profiles stored somewhere centrally that needed to be downloaded to machines when users get connected. That type of functionality exists here, but with Microsoft's acquisition of FSLogix, we get the ability to do dynamically attached profiles that are encapsulated into VHDs and then attached to the machine instances. So this is where we determine what we want that profile to look like. At the very least, we want to ensure that we've got all of our app data, local user settings, and things that that the users do and save. That way, that persists in their session going across machines. Very, very popular because we have OneDrive available to us readily. Is to do home folder or node folder redirection to OneDrive, which doesn't force us to deal with the risk overhead of users blowing up our storage, but still leveraging the FSLogix profiles to provide that contiguous user experience. So there's multiple paths forward for how we deal with profiles themselves. Depending on the scale that we get to, we leverage Azure NetApp files to be able to give us the performance that we need to meet large amounts of concurrency. And then once we've got those decisions made, we just simply need a subscription with the proper access to get the environment deployed. Now we have automated the vast majority of the stand up of this process. So what this comes down to at a very high level is stepping through the individual use cases. Now, if that is faculty and staff desktop, if that is just a general student desktop that we're going to publish labs to later, if it's going through student labs that are no longer accessible on premises, or even taking the reaction to COVID off of the table for a minute, we're able to publish GPU-backed applications to complement existing on-premises VDI farms, for example. We're able to do some workloads that would be a little bit too capital intensive to do on premises, or maybe we don't have the capacity to share between departments now that we've got this this remote working and remote learning requirement in front of us. So there's a few things that we can kind of step through from a use case perspective. But at the end of the day, once we identify what that use case is, we build an image, we create a host pool, and then once we've gone through some testing and validation steps, and made sure that it meets our user need, performance specs, and several things, depending on the application stack that's inside the image, we scale it out and publish it to users. And then the users use either the HTML5 client, or if they have a Windows, Android, or iOS device, there is an actual agent that provides a little bit better of an experience, but we can use HTML5 anywhere, anytime, and it does provide that browser native experience for fully leveraging the platform. The only kind of shift here is dealing with full desktop or just deploying remote applications, which is a published app. I'll show you a little later in the deck how those two things kind of look in the portal or the application. They do function differently. Once you sign into a desktop, you've got full capabilities to use all of the applications that are published to that desktop, but also we can publish remote apps to a desktop experience for the end user, have them consume everything in one place. But again, for some use cases and dealing with potential hybrid infrastructure, publish remote applications is the way to go. So our first use case, and we've stepped through quite a bit of virtual labs actually prior to dealing with responding to COVID-19 requirements. This was very heavily focused on the graphical backed applications. Again, being able to augment that existing footprint on premises that we've already got some sunk costs into, that people already know how to use, and we've already got some capacity, providing GPU backed applications published to those machines to kind of augment that functionality. But we've also been able to fully lift and shift labs. Now that could be labs, internal actual computer labs that got 40, 50 machines, which will translate to 40, 50 concurrent sessions in virtual desktop. There's a lot of flexibility for what the quote unquote lab in Azure looks like, because we do have burstable capability and auto scaling built around the machines. We could have a smaller amount running, for example. But at the end of the day, when we create the student lab, we have the ability to associate their UPNs with an AD group that corresponds to that lab. And we've got automation made to automatically push them to that pool, so they get the applications that they need based off of the AD group that they're put in, which becomes the management front end for adding users to or removing users for pools. Is a very familiar identity process that's already set up going through your Active Directory. And that is some automation that we have produced that doesn't require us to do individual UPN pushes. So for anybody who's dove into getting WVD set up initially, we've got some efficiencies that we can bring to the table. The other use case, again, education, is actually delivering education. Now, this could be full education delivery to students. This could be remote teaching. We've got basically a host pool that gives us that desktop experience, again, while having professors or teachers be able to choose what applications they need for their students, put them into either a published app pool or a desktop pool for use. We've stepped through, again, a wide variety of use cases that cover both of these. We're able to get some interesting applications in the higher education space, especially around computer science, that have got underlying dependencies and command line based switches that are required to make them work. We have been able to get just about everything thrown at us running in this environment, so we can meet most use cases. The only caveat here is this covers Windows based workloads. So anything that we have internally that is Linux based that we can't run on Windows, we come over the top and complement the virtual desktop implementation with Azure Lab Services, and we have the ability to do our Linux based deployment and delivery kind of in conjunction with the virtual desktop implementation. But that is something that is a requirement currently because this is only deals with Windows, but there is on the roadmap that may change. And then, as I mentioned again, GPU published applications. So we've published ArcGIS, MATLAB. We've done the quite a bit around just general data modeling, SPR, R. We've gotten Jupyter notebooks pushed out there to leverage a specific ASIC for asynchronous code execution. Like we've got again the full capabilities of backend Azure Compute to kind of optimize what this looks like. So if it's a visual application, we can optimize based off that. If it's asynchronous code execution, we can optimize off that to allow us to again stack more sessions per machine. Drive some efficiencies around the cost model for what this is going to look like. And then we've got capabilities to actually do telemetry-based auto-scaling off of GPUs with the management solution that we as ACS have put together, which I'll show you later in the deck as well. And then finally, what I really should label the COVID-19 response, which is taking our administrative and faculty and staff desktops, lifting and shifting that capability to Azure. Again, goes through a process of creating an image that has at least the baseline software that everybody needs, and then we're able to add additional publishing remote applications that get department specific, but providing everybody sort of a single pooled workspace that they have access to that we can add additional layers to based off a departmental group later. But this is something that we've gone through several iterations of, again, depending on what the requirements are in front of us. We've got teams running in these environments. We've gotten WebEx teams. We've gotten a couple other sort of collaboration software pieces up there. It is very possible to also do audio capture and device capture, so you can fully use the environment to do voice and video calls as well. So there is several use cases on the administrative side, including internal IT folks having a central dashboard to be able to get into all of their systems with all their tools pre-baked and ready to go. So there is kind of a wide variety of use cases here. The path getting into that is the same. We implement the cloud adoption framework. We make sure that we have the underlying success foundation for Azure, so this becomes something that becomes a long-term viability, and then we work through the individual use cases and also go through sort of an issue tracking of anything that comes up, any user experience issues, and kind of address them programmatically where possible, and then deal with one-offs as we need to. So again, the Windows Virtual Desktop multi-session OS is technically built on top of Server 2016. It's got containerized instances of Windows 10, which means that we can use the high-end sizing of virtual machines to provide the best possible experience for the pool that you have. As soon as you're able to step into the larger core counts, which Server 2016 supports, then you can get entire instances of compute dedicated directly to your organization, which allows us to multi-home a little bit more aggressively because we don't have to share compute capability with anybody else. And then we've got obviously our optimizations for Office 365 built in, so we don't need to deal with any of those version updates, deal with any of the complexities for installing Office for multi-user in a virtual environment. And then obviously with those design capabilities, when we have that image, we have the ability to scale, add, and deploy in minutes once that's been made. So just as a quick summary of the pieces of WVD, and something that I did kind of gloss over, is we do support Windows 7. So if there's Windows 7 labs or workstations that are out there, we can lift and shift those to this environment. Although we do have to do that a little bit differently than the multi-session Win 10 experience, but it is very possible, and it is something that can be used as a bridge to get to 10. And have the ability to kind of move those things over directly in the Windows Virtual Desktop platform. And then again, we can do multi-tenancy depending on how Active Directory is set up. So this could be in the case of a university where we've got multiple colleges within the university. Each of them can have their own WVD implementation. We get into fiefdoms a little bit with how IT support works in some of those organizations. So we do have the ability to do segmentation up here, as long as our existing Active Directory setup supports it. And then we've got, again, the full underlying support of Azure Compute. So whatever our application stack winds up running best on, we can choose that, make sure we've got capacity, and then scale to meet the need with those underlying machines. And then, so as I mentioned before, and Rich alluded to, we've been working in the virtual desktop space for a while. We've been working with the product since it came out in preview last year, and have gone through the fire a few times over the past few months with large organizations, and reacting to some of the gaps in the Microsoft native tooling. We have produced a management plane for Windows Virtual Desktop, and actually created some more robust auto scaling logic that allows us to deal with multiple scenarios in one place through a single pane of glass. So we've got our ability to deal with what Microsoft's auto scaling is session based with some time associated with it. We add to that by adding multiple logics for how we deal with our auto scaling, how we scale in and scale out hosts, how many machines are dealt with, basically allowing us to kind of tune the environment to meet not only the logon storm of users hitting all during certain times of the day when classes are starting, but have that live side by side with GPU and CPU telemetry to make sure that we've got a good user experience. So if somebody happens to be doing something on a machine, part of a class that is eating up a bunch of resources, instead of having everybody else suffer, it'll move on to the next one. And once that's calmed down, open that back up for sessions, for example. And then again, the GPU-based telemetry allows us to do some right sizing on graphical workloads, and be able to drive some cost efficiencies on the most expensive machines that you'll use in WVD. And then because we have all of these things integrated all into one logic set, they run concurrently. So we can have our peak settings roll out, and then telemetry take over to kind of right size the environment. Everything kind of works at the same time. And then being mindful of again, the value add of leveraging Windows Virtual Desktop with existing Microsoft licensing, there is no per user cost for this tool. And then going into how we actually manage and control the WVD environment, we're able to fully deploy, add to pools, either starting fresh or adding additional, including doing iterative naming based off of the existing naming convention. So we don't need to have multiple sets of machines named something different that are all in the host pool. We can add whenever we need to. We've separated the pool join process, which allows us to scale and deploy up to 200 machines at once, which is the limit for an availability set, and then have all of the capability of pushing any software that might have been missed after the fact with tooling that we've got built, and then integrated diagnostics, which is an important piece for having a single pane of glass to be able to see what's going on in the environment, including correlating user sessions to the instance they're on, and having the capability of actually remediating stuck sessions and a few other administrative tasks that kind of have come up as tickets through the production implementation of the Windows Virtual Desktop platform. So there were two types of deployment. So this is an example of the published application. This is what it actually looks like for the end user when they sign into their application. Based off of what the app group that we name, we assign applications to that. So now our computer science students, in this example, they're going to get Visual Studio, they're going to get RStudio, they're going to get SSMS and Notepad++. Which we wanted to showcase Notepad++ because there's no installer for this. This is just an executable that sits on the machine. So you still can publish, just about any app as long as we have a UNC path for it to an executable. And then, graphic design students are getting the Adobe products that are backed by NVIDIA GPUs. But this is, again, just kind of an example of how we can break things up and then have these be an AD group that has users automatically added to them and pruned from this based off of additions or subtractions to the Active Directory group itself. When we do published applications, these are opened individually. If we're going through the HTML5 browser, you'll get a tab for each of them. If it's going through the desktop browser, everything just kind of opens up on your desktop as if it's running locally. The published desktop option allows us to do a couple things. I mean, obviously, it gives us a full desktop, which is what is a nice to have, but not necessarily a requirement for everything. But even if we were to go down the published application route, which we have done sort of this hybrid setup where we have our fat desktops that have an actual Windows instance that people log into, that is generalized enough that it's applicable to either the entire organization or kind of two subsets of people within an organization. One host pool is applicable for students, one becomes faculty, staff, and that just becomes the the actual desktop everybody logs into. That's pretty generic. It may have a couple apps, but usually that's just Windows plus Office plus whatever sort of monitoring and management tools that you need. And then when we do this and we include in this Windows instance the remote desktop agent, we're able to add the user to this VM host pool, and then we're able to add the user also to this computer science application group and have SQL Server, Management Studio, Notepad, RStudio, and Visual Studio Code actually show up on this machine as if it's installed. But it's not. It's a published app running somewhere else in the environment. The end user will never know the difference other than there's a little icon or a little symbol on the icon itself that signifies it running through virtual desktop. So underlying all of this, once we do go down the published desktop option, we need to deal with profiles. What you don't want to do is have those live locally on the machine, because then there's either going to be some sprawl and waste from a storage perspective, or users are going to run into issues because they're not going to be able to save anything like browser settings, for example, or Office settings, things that wind up going in our app data, local, low, and roaming folders. Those are encapsulated with FSLogix, so it gives the better end user experience. But that is typically only something that we need to go through on the desktop side itself. When we're dealing with published applications, we're leveraging local storage. It's going to leverage the end user's machine itself, their hard drive or OneDrive if we're using it, which is also something worth mentioning up here. Even if we are using OneDrive and doing the redirection, we still are going to have FSLogix in play. So those are just kind of the back end pieces that stitch all this together. When we do that, again, in the lens of education, if we get the student as they come in as a freshman. I mean, this could be K-12, this could be higher ed, doesn't particularly matter, but they get their desktop and they get their OneDrive. Now, as they move through their 4 years at the institution, they go between general classes into something more specific. We have the ability for their profile just to move between machines and move between pools as they iterate over time, allowing them to kind of keep everything that they've done throughout their student experience in either encapsulated in that profile or in their OneDrive. So they'll have the ability to use stuff that they did as a freshman later on, or at least be able to reference it. So it gives us some flexibility. It also allows us to deal with student transfers between departments. There's a lot of flexibility on the remote desktop side when we set up that mobile profile. All we need to do on our side, once that's all set up, is change their AD group change where their profile attaches to. No downloading, everything runs directly off of the SMB share that we deploy as part of that profile. And then here are a couple screenshots. Again, here's what the HTML5 client looks like once you sign into it. Based off of the pool that you're associated with, you get the published applications and then the actual session desktop. Now, these published applications are all Microsoft approved, which means that it's already got like the icon, and everything kind of tied into it. But we could publish open source applications that we have. We've done Blender for graphical video editing. We've done a bunch of open source Python based applications that you just have to kind of choose what icon you use. But other than that, you've got full capability to name things in here, to have it logically laid out however you see fit, including changing session desktop to whatever you want it to say. So this is fully customizable, kind of what this looks like by just modifying some code. And then the remote desktop agent on the end machine looks very similar, but the process of opening the application and using it are different. So on the HTML5 client, everything opens as tabs in the actual client itself as a container. The desktop clients will actually open these things on the taskbar, and it will look like they're running locally. Obviously, this looks a little bit different on the Apple and Android side, but same type of functionality, same publishing. It's going to publish the app pools that are going to be accessible via icons, and then the desktop is going to be accessible via a desktop. Just because I could, I put this on my phone. So I have a Samsung Android device, and I have the Android agent on the phone. Works. I can sign into a desktop. I can open my applications and do everything through that client. Not to say that that we want to offer phones as a means for people to be able to access this, but what that does mean, and we've got a large university in the Northeast that's using it, is that you can use Chromebooks with this native agent, or even the HTML5, depending on the OS level of the Chromebook itself. So we've got the ability to layer virtual desktop on any sort of existing device management platform, with a caveat of thin clients. Thin client support is coming natively. Right now, there's third-party options to be able to leverage existing hardware. And then I'll turn this over to Rich again to kind of go over what our support model looks like to help organizations get over the hump of dealing with COVID-19, while we can do some skill set transformation with the support staff to make sure that this is an implementation that's successful long term.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, so we have a signature support program, which is essentially managed support, where we're leveraging our product Cloud Control for Windows Virtual Desktop to manage the environment for customers. And what we've done in particular, because of this whole really rapid deployment of Windows Virtual Desktop, where we're not doing a traditional knowledge transfer like we normally would. In some cases, we have to work very quickly with our customers. So we have a limited offer for a 3-month support agreement, and it's essentially to get you through the spring semester and into the summer. So it's to finish the, if it's K-12, it's to finish the academic year, and then into the summer. So we'll provide pretty much what we call signature support, where we're leveraging the environment, managing the scaling up and scaling down for you with the tool, and just proactively monitoring the environment so that you can continue to focus on what you need to focus on, which is providing resources to actually teach from and with. And we can manage the environment for you. So this managed support offering is something that we've deployed for a couple of customers so far, and it seems to be something that is a little bit of a security blanket. And most companies, likely, or most schools, whether it be K-12 or higher ed, haven't necessarily budgeted for this. So we do it in a way to make it pretty easy and cost effective. And then, once you get into the summer time frame and you start your budgeting for the next school year, next academic year, you can then budget if you want to continue with a full contract for the next calendar year. So it's something that we offer when we get into these engagements with our customers as we deploy the solution. to assist with the management of the platform. We also can talk about how we can help you if you need some additional support managing it so that you don't have to take FTE resources to that weren't otherwise allocated for something like this. We can provide that for you. So Chris, I don't know if you can see or you want to take a moment. There's a couple questions that were in the chat window.
Sure.
And so maybe we can address those. The ones that you can answer, we can answer those. But we will provide this recording for those who weren't up on our website, I believe. Laurie, is that correct? It'll be on our website. So that if you want to go back and look through any of these documents and listen to it, you can. Our contact information is here, which we can provide as well, so that if you do have an interest or you do have a need, you can start with me, and then Chris has a team of folks that are specializing in these deployments. He's the lead of it, and if you are interested, we do have a call. It'll likely be either Chris or one other that would have the initial call, and then you would get introduced to our team if it's an engagement we want to move forward with. There are some things available from Microsoft right now. I would encourage you to reach out to your account teams that support you. There are some COVID-19 emergency response funds available for a limited time for some qualified customers. So if you have a relationship with your Microsoft account team, you may want to inquire about it. If you do have a need to get something up quickly, you may be able to take advantage of that as well. So Chris, you want to look through the questions and see what we can answer there? And
yeah.
If you have questions, you can pop them in the window as well. Or if we want to unmute everybody and open it up to questions, it's up to you, Chris. We have about 12 minutes left.
I don't think we want to unmute because that may be a little unruly, but cool. I can go through the questions that we started here.
Okay.
Starting with Ryan Chan. We likely can handle all of the ADA apps depending on what the specific connection requirements look like. We could do video pass-through, audio pass-through. So when we can do both of those captures from the local end user machine, it's kind of a full capability of Windows 10 at that point with what we can publish and do from the compatibility standpoint. So that's that we do have. There's several settings we can put on the actual connection itself that allows us to pivot and deal with a lot of use cases, including ADA type items, and then. Next one down the list, we actually have deployed SCCM as the agent to manage our long-term images a few times. If you've got that existing, then these appear to you as virtual machines sitting in your SCCM implementation, as long as they're running, which would be the caveat, because again, auto scaling and driving some efficiencies on the pools themselves are something that we want to do. But what we've done for SCCM users is you've got your whatever your patch schedule looks like, we pause the auto scaling, turn all the machines on, get them patched, and then turn auto scaling back off to prune back down. That agent has been successfully pushed as part of the actual image as well as post deployment. And then from a pricing perspective, we went over the Microsoft licensing. So from a WVD, you don't have any of the per user concurrency or any of the licenses that Citrix would have to run the environment, as long as you've got the Office 365 licenses, which you likely do, being educational institutions. So that's there's some more caveat to that. Obviously, if we're looking at our management solution, again, we license based off of just the overall pools, not per user. So that's how our side of the house works. But from a comparison standpoint of WVD native and Citrix, that's the big delta, is we get rid of there's no more need for CALs. Those are tied into the Office license itself, and there's no need for concurrency, and there's definitely no license for GPU. So GPU-backed applications in this case are just another use case of WVD. There's no differentiation from a licensing perspective. And then licensed products. So this is just in general for there's a question for Adobe Creative Suite, and then just in general licensed products. underlying these virtual machines is Azure networking. So we have the ability, and we've done several different implementations of this, to call home to licensing servers, to call out over the internet to a licensing endpoint. Whatever we need to deal with, we deal with through the Azure infrastructure. Make sure that we've got proper routing, firewalling, and control in place. And that allows us to deal with actual license applications. Now, where users are prompted to sign in with credentials, that is something they're going to have to do even with Office. When we do the FSLogix encapsulated local profile, that stuff saves. So that's the point of doing that type of profile configuration, because we don't want, again, we're cognizant of the end user experience. We want them to pass in their credentials once, and then once they get into their session, everything that they do in browser settings they save, bookmarks they put in save. Those are all kind of again kind of key focuses of why we layer FSLogix on top of this. And then the other question, I'm assuming the uptime is for Azure. We have not had any reported issues of machines or any sort of downtime. We have thousands of concurrent student sessions in place in several different locations. So from a scale perspective, as long as we plan for the capacity and you've got the capacity allocated to your subscription, we have not seen any issues with that. And then USB device pass-through is a little bit different than how that works with Citrix. So we do have quite a few switches that we could put on the actual RDS session that's opened through the broker to the end machine, which is the same answer for if we can configure audio pass-through. Yes, we can. The pass-through is done on the actual RDS itself, with some programming of the session by host pool. So we can have a host pool where we are doing full Teams collaboration sessions, audio and video pass through the VDI session, or that could be applicable for the entire environment, depending on the use case that we've got. And obviously, there may be some more questions that come up, and we can kind of deal with them as a one-off. Any issues with high CPU, RAM, GPU with Autodesk, AutoCAD, and then other applications. So application specifics, there's typically not any governors built in to limit the resource allocation. So how that process kind of works when we go through the initial design is we do some stress testing and load testing, and what that will tell us is, based off of the test sample that we've got, how many users can we put on in a given session on the hardware that they're using with the apps that they're using before they start to bog things down or potentially blow each other's sessions up. That's kind of the first step to that. And then the reason why we come over the top with telemetry-based auto scaling is it allows us to put some programmatic controls around our assumptions to then be able to spread the load between however many machines we need to, based off of the use case and the total amount of concurrent sessions we're assuming, and then over provision. So we'll put out more than we know we need, and let the programmatic logic smooth things out over time, which will give us an accurate picture of what we actually are using. But the auto scaling makes sure that we don't over consume, and then with a 5-minute interval prune off machines that we don't need to control costs. But that allows us to balance the end user, the end user experience. And then the other answer that comes over the top of that is also group policy. So we've got any sort of outbound proxy filtering for your web traffic, for example. So very, very popular to block YouTube, for example, and not allow users, even though they're on a browser on their local machine, to use that nested in this environment. That helps kind of control some of the compute cycles. But those are all, again, kind of little nuanced design options that depend on your use case. So FSLogix is an interesting animal, and the answer to that question depends purely on how many concurrent users you're looking at. So we kind of deal with environments that are going to be 500 plus users, maybe not even concurrent, but just total, on a higher IO SMB share via Azure NetApp files. That way we have a PaaS service. We don't have any underlying anything to administer. But depending on concurrency and total user sessions, we do have the ability to put that elsewhere. That is tied into the image itself, the actual desktop. There's an agent that gets installed. There's some registry settings that get put on there. So we've got kind of full control on image by image level. But we also can, as long as the agent is included on all of our images, we can fully control that via group policy. And then when we control via group policy, we ultimately put all of the machines in any given host pool in an OU. They may all sit in the same OU for all of WVD, whatever that looks like. That allows us to scope in our GPO for FS Logics to be pool specific based off of how we break up our OUs in our Active Directory. And then is there an additional cost for high CPU, RAM, GPU desktop via regular standard Windows desktop? In the underlying compute, there is a delta in cost for GPU and CPU, but there's not any specific licensing delta or cost for using those. It's just it's an hourly cost for the machine running. We leverage Azure Hybrid Use benefit to use your existing server licensing where we can if you've got it, and then we wrap automation around that footprint to reduce the amount of time it's running down to as little as possible. So those kind of help control costs on that, but again, we could use and all this comes down to going through translating what your use case is, how many users we need to do concurrently, kind of figuring out what that looks like and how we're going to deal with sessions. So there's some nuance in there in choosing the initial machine size in terms of the amount of cores. The smaller the machines, the more dynamic we can be in terms of avoiding waste. Because smaller compute footprint, less people on it. Even if it's running 24/7, you incur a lesser cost. But depending on the use case, the schedule, the concurrency, we've got kind of full design flexibility there to get you into a compute and cost optimized footprint that can pivot and deal with whatever we need to.
Well, I think that's all the questions. Chris, thanks for jumping on those. That's good. And thank you everyone for participating. We will be posting this recording on our website, which is at Applied. It's right down at the bottom, www.appliedcloud.io. And we will be again, it'll be posted there. Our contact information is here. I would encourage you to reach out to your Microsoft account teams. I mean, we're essentially an extension of the Microsoft team, really. The way that we operate. So if you contact us, chances are we'll be in touch with the Microsoft account team to make sure that you've got all the requisite requirements in place for to deploy WVD, and or if you reach out to them, they will connect with us. Either way, but our contact information is here. I'd encourage you to work closely with your Microsoft account team because there are some programs available. And again, this will be posted on our website. We do appreciate you participating. If you have any questions, feel free to shoot them in the chat window and we will attempt to respond, or you can also email us at the information that's provided. So thank you very much and have a great day, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate your time this afternoon.